down on prey, we're gaining ground. Glory, hallelujah, the dead's alive and the lost is found. Glory, hallelujah.
Welcome to Eschatology Matters on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. I'm your host, Josh Howard, and we want to begin by mentioning Boniface Media. Boniface Media is a streaming platform from Grace and Truth Press, and Boniface is right now offering 50% off to 200 subscribers for the life of their subscription, unless that subscription is canceled or their payment lapses. So if you'd like to take advantage of that offer, head over to boniface.com. It's BONAFICE.com. Enter your codes alpha test or beta test to apply your 50% discount. So I am joined today with Jamie Bambrick, who is the editor over at Clear Truth Media. So Jamie, thank you so much for joining me, brother.
Thank you for having me. Always good to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to apologize to everybody who's watching the video. I'm going to make sure Jamie is the one talking. The camera went down today. No idea why. I'm a bit older, so it could be technology. It might be user error. If anybody would like to sponsor our show for an exorbitant fee, we'll hook you up with that. But yeah, the camera's terrible. Jamie's obviously looks good. So yeah, Jamie, good to have you. And you're by the way I introduce us now is we knew Jamie Bambrick before you did. That's our claim to fame at Eschatology Matters.
Right.
Like we were talking to this guy a while back. So
Yeah.
you've got a lot going on. If you want to give us a little just like kind of rundown of where you're at these days.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm incredibly wealthy and famous, and have been, so I'm assuming everybody knows everything about me, and all of that. But no, great to be back, and I'll say the same thing about you in due course, right?
Yeah.
So we just launched Clear Truth Media, which is really exciting. So we've got a bunch of people from all across the sort of conservative evangelical sphere contributing to that. Some big names, including yourself, involved in doing that, which has been a blessing. A whole bunch of others that people may well know of, and some others that maybe people don't know of quite so well, but who have a track record of producing some really good stuff. So we literally launched that 2 and a bit weeks ago at the time of recording, and been off to a great start. Really exciting to see that go, and start strong, get some good traction. A lot of people tuning in. I think a lot of people saying that this is something that needs to exist, that something like this is a blessing to the church. And so we're just excited to see that grow and reach and get out to more people. And other than that, I'm still a pastor and still make YouTube videos. So, all of the usuals.
Very cool. Yeah, no, we're going to talk a little bit later about, why it is a necessary thing right now. Like, why would Clear Truth be a need? I think that's a really valuable one to talk about. I do want to mention before we get going, heritage books. If you want to start reading the Puritans, but you don't know where to begin, we want to recommend Puritan Treasures for Today from Reformation Heritage Books. So Reformation Heritage Books, it makes the riches of these godly writers of old accessible works accessible for the modern reader. So they've got updated language, helpful introductions to these works, and these classic works from John Owen, Jeremiah Burroughs, and more are the perfect starting point for the curious reader. So you can learn more about the Puritan Treasures series from Reformation Heritage Books. You can find out about them at heritagebooks.org/Puritan Treasures. It is a great series, and we do recommend you check that out. Jamie, so you guys have launched Clear Truth Media. I wrote an article for you guys. You guys had a splash of articles. Can I say we had a splash of articles? I'll take credit.
Yeah. You're part of
all
this.
Your editorial work. I'll just assume this was my doing. No, a lot of really great articles. Just a slew of them came out these last 2 weeks. I wrote one. I kind of keyed in on that Watchman on the Wall motif. And really, to me, this was kind of part of the whole Clear Truth story. So I was kind of trying to key in on the fact that there's a biblical motif of a watchman on the wall who's to guard against danger and to call out danger to those inside the city. And there's a judgment that comes upon that watchman for failing to do so, but also it is a judgment upon the city, was my argument, when the watchman fails to do so. So I wrote that. You had one come out that was titled something along the lines of "Why We Must Abandon the Gospel Coalition" or TGC. Something. I'll let you correct me here in a second. But then I saw Doug Wilson wrote one on sheepdogs that wouldn't bark. That sort of theme. What were you seeing and others seeing that I think many Christians might have missed, but I think many Christians are picking up on, is that there seemed to be some microphones that were not broadcasting warnings that they might ought have been.
Yeah. So yeah, my article was called "Why It's Time to Say Goodbye to TGC." So along the same lines, pretty much exactly what you said. And yeah, I think we were picking up very much on the same thing, which is that over the last few years, and 2020 was probably a key flashpoint on this, but it had been going on a little bit prior. So some people picked up on it very early. I didn't pick up on it quite as early as that, but I certainly saw it in 2020. I'd had some concerns a little bit earlier with the MLK 50 thing, which I believe was
Right.
2017, something like that. I can't remember exactly when that was, but it was a couple of years prior. But I still hadn't I still assumed that, yeah, that was a bit of an error. Broadly, everything's fine at TGC. But I think what we were all picking up on was, and what we all realized was that in a time of crisis, the the conservative evangelical, at least ostensibly conservative evangelical institutions that were the key voices speaking into that section of the church really did miss it very, very badly, and were not well prepared for what was coming, hadn't got their categories right, had missed some serious theological issues, and therefore, whenever there was all of this cultural pressure that came very, very suddenly. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of build up to it, but nonetheless, for a lot of people, it kind of hit out of nowhere when you had COVID and then BLM come very quickly. You could say also alongside all of that, there has been this still comparatively rapid movement towards, issues on sexuality and transgenderism and so on that it wasn't quite as rapid as those other two, but if we look at it over, say, a 20-year span, that issue has progressed significantly in the culture.
Right.
And I think a lot of people realized that those guys really didn't have good answers to the key theological and cultural battles of the day. So functionally, if you look at how TGC, and I use them as the prime example, because I think, whilst now a lot of conservative Christians go, yeah, not a big fan of them or whatever the case may be, they were the key voice speaking into the conservative evangelical church for over a decade, maybe 15 plus years.
Right.
And they on BLM, they did what I describe as like just gospel washing it. It's just, this is gospel. Racial justice articles, all of that stuff. No analysis whatsoever of the underlying claims, the underlying worldview behind this movement. Really minimal pushback on anything regarding critical race theory or putting it out there as this is a totally like acceptable option at the very least, if not something we just have to buy into. We've got to buy into white privilege. We've got to buy into systemic oppression and all of the various things that were part of that movement. So I think they failed on that. They failed very much on COVID as well, where, again, if you look at the instincts of conservative evangelicals, I think they broadly were quite a strong force in pushing back on this stuff. And yet you had TGC, one of the key evangelical institutions, going, nope, go along with mask mandates, get yourself vaccinated, all of that stuff. And anything other than that is failure to love your neighbor. So I think that those things all combined showed that the watchman on the wall, as you'd put it, and I actually used the same term in my article on them.
I noticed
that they really
you were copying from me, of course, on that, not Ezekiel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pure plagiarism,
sure.
and I'm assuming I'll get a lawsuit in due course. That they really didn't recognize the enemies that were out there, didn't recognize what those enemies were going to look like. And then even in hindsight haven't retracted and have stood by their position, which I find to be probably the worst thing, because I really do have a lot of grace. I believe I do. I hope I do. I aim to anyway. I have a lot of grace for people that make a mistake, get it wrong. I understand the midst of cultural pressure, people are not perfect, and they'll miss it, and they'll sin, and they'll also make errors that are not sinful errors. They're just errors. And nonetheless, I would have expected that now down the road, we would have seen a lot of retractions, a lot of resorting out of this stuff of going, yeah, look, we messed up. There hasn't been any of that. And so I think that part of the reason why we wanted to do what we're doing at Clear Truth is we wanted to create a new institution that will hopefully be strong theologically, but also strong on some of those cultural issues that are theological issues. I don't think we should say that they're not, but they might not fit into the sort of traditional mold of, say, in a systematic theology, where do you put the critical race theory, thing, right? Where does that probably doesn't get touched on that. So those cultural issues, we wanted an institution that was willing to push back, that wasn't seeking to win the favor of the left, that wasn't seeking to sort of mediate or mollify itself maybe to that position, but rather was quite happy to take stands, take them firmly and boldly, and hopefully that sets us in a trajectory that whenever new challenges come up, we've been very clear about the challenges that currently exist, but whenever new challenges come up, that we have a track record of having pushed back, and people expect us to do the same, and that hopefully that'll set us in good stead to do so. So, yeah, that's a few thoughts anyway.
Yeah, no, it's one, and you were pointing out kind of well, every one of us has shared a TGC article. I still have several stored on my phone that are super helpful, super good. I think the thing that's there's an aversion within evangelicalism to walking something back or to apologizing for something, which to a Christian, that should just be very reflexive, is that I got this wrong. Let me tell you about this. I mean, during 2020, everybody was being confronted with things that they didn't have all the information on. That's fine. You make a misstep. I think I think when you have a walking back of things that you've made missteps on, number one, that builds trust. It shows humility. But also when you have scolded others for not doing what you thought they should have done, and especially as you pointed out, framing that in gospel terms, and then never walking that back. There's just that's where the people that are maybe not as engaged with it as others, they can even see that from the outside of like, well, wait, we were just told this was a gospel issue. It does kind of key in on too, and it's something I wanted to kind of push us toward. So you mentioned that Clear Truth is kind of focused on those articles that are hitting the issues of the day, and they may not be a systematic production. When you reached out and when we were talking a little bit about Clear Truth, that was sort of my concern, is that I'm just kind of an academically minded guy. Like that's kind of how I write and think. And a lot of the stuff with Clear Truth, we're trying to really make it palatable, right? This is supposed to be something digestible by people, which is, I think that should be the goal a lot of times. There's this weird thing though within Christendom where it does not become palatable, where there's almost it's as if we have the thoughts back here, but the application seems to be lacking. I don't know how to direct this toward a question, but I'm just curious your thoughts on this, because I don't think this is isolated to the U.S. I don't think it's isolated to Western Christianity, and I don't think it's just a seminary level problem. There seems to be a disconnect oftentimes between right thinking and right doctrine and the right application of that. And one of the ways you're a pastor, I'm a pastor. I've observed this in church, that you can exegete a sermon quite thoroughly. You can go into the Greek and the Hebrew and exegete a passage, rather, not a sermon, but you can exegete a passage or a text quite thoroughly and never apply it, and it be counted as a good sermon. And that's always been interesting to me. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that, or if you see similar dynamics where you are.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. I think it is a real challenge. So first, I just want to say we do want to do actual theology on Clear Truth as well, right? We want to be a
Didn't mean to,
resource. So
didn't mean to paint the improper picture there. Yeah,
we actually explicitly don't want to just hit cultural issues. We do want to also hit cultural issues, but we have theology as one of our streams, and very much something we want to hit. And over time, we do hope to build up a really good bank of stuff in that regard. So. Just for clarity on that, and I know you know that. It's just the way you phrase that. I just want to make sure that the audience knows that. But so actually, this is one thing that I think often it comes down to how we communicate and what we believe the aim of our communication is. Um, I would, this is going to sound insane, but I don't know if I should say this on a podcast. Should I say this on? Okay, I'm going to
Well,
say
I
this.
think you
This will be
should
the most
definitely say it on a
controversial
pod.
thing
Yeah.
I ever say, right? Okay. I'm going to recommend a book by Andy Stanley,
Oh
and it's
my.
not a theology book. It's a book called Communicating for a Change, and it's on how he structures his sermons. And Andy Stanley, like him or loathe him, and I sit much more in the second category, be very publicly critical of him from his theological standpoint. He is a communication genius. He is very, very good at communicating. And what he thinks about when he is structuring his sermons is, how do I get someone to change their action at the end of this? And I often think that's a very good starting point. And so I've actually used that, and I actually do use that even in my general communication. He has a rough structure that he broadly follows, and it starts off with, um, well, actually, so the way he preaches it is, why do they need to know this? So it's drawing interest, because I think whenever you are a pastor, a theologian, whatever it may be, you're already interested in the subject. You already care. You're already passionate. You know why it matters. But the average person sitting in the pew a lot of the time has had a busy week. They've just dragged the kids there. They are tired. They're distracted. They're doing their best. They're not insincere, but it's just, there's challenges of life, and they're not sitting there thinking about the arguments that we've been having on Twitter, and we've got it all lined up, and all the books we've been reading, right? They just haven't done that. They're not in that place. So one of the key things that is good to do in communication is motivating them to listen. Going like, here's why this matters. Here's why this is a big deal. Before I tell you any more, like let me just get your attention as to what actually is important here. Then it's the key information, which I think is the bulk of the message. Is like, what do they need to know? And taking that concept and applying it much more richly theologically than I think anyone like Stanley would do. But going right, here's the key content. But then it's also, what do they need to do and why do they need to do it? So making that a key like landing point. You can do that various ways. You can do that in a couple of different sections, but I actually do feel that that is a very helpful sort of common grace wisdom way to communicate with people, is to understand where they're coming from, and what the issues they are facing are, and then also just being compassionate to them, and recognizing that actually, do you know what, they're not going to get everything here. So sometimes it's about refining it as well. I think one of the key things in communicating well, at least this is this is my personal opinion. I'm not saying that this is gospel, right? This is just thoughts. Um, but I think one of the key things to do is actually what you leave out. Sometimes guys that love the info, love the depth of it, have a tendency to want to say everything. It's like, I've got to get all, like, you got to hit all of this. And it's like, well, sometimes actually you just need to drive home a key point that really is the main focus of everything, rather than say, and that means sometimes you miss a little bit of nuance, or there's a little bit of technical stuff that might go a little bit deeper. And I find myself doing this a lot in my own sermons. I go, there's a lot of theology we could get into here, but I like, so let's say we're on a topic, and it goes right. Well, we could talk about the sovereignty of God here. We could get into like a Calvinism and Arminianism thing here, but that's not what this message is. This message is not intended to do that. So sometimes you can do that, but a lot of the time you just got to go, hey, look, I'm just gonna leave that. You're gonna have your perspective. That's fine. Just not touch that. Let's go on to the next thing. I think that's quite helpful to do sometimes. Um, I never. There was a quote by, I don't know, I believe it was a quote by Charles Spurgeon. I have attempted to Google this infinity times and never once found it, but it was something along the lines of, when you're preaching, don't push in 10 penny tacks, he called it, like tiny nails that will fall out after 10 minutes. Drive home one massive thick nail.
Mm.
Drive home one spike that's going to stay. So I think that's a lot of it. I think just guys that love the info, that love the technical stuff and get fired up about that, It's wonderful. It's good. It's needed. It has a place. But I think in terms of a lot of everyday communication, sometimes it's just, hey, let's simplify this. Let's leave out some of the technical stuff. Let's get the main point that people here need to know in a way that is hopefully interesting and compelling. So I don't know. That's off the cuff thoughts.
Yeah, no,
Hopefully I don't
it's
get cancelled for saying Andy Stanley's name in a positive light, but he is a good communicator, genuinely.
well, yeah. This episode is going to go to the, it's going to go to the like what the, not the trash bin, but like the whatever like the reserve bin is, where it gets like released a long time after it's
Yeah,
recorded.
yeah,
Brandon's going to definitely pull it. No, it is good, and he is a good communicator. I think, and I was
yeah,
thinking as you were talking too about the cutting room floor stuff is always so interesting, and it's not just pastors preaching sermons, like right, that like this would be Christian teaching articles, right, that you're submitting. I
hmm
once heard somebody refer to it as you build a mountain and then you whittle it down to a hill, something along those lines, right? You're supposed to build this, do the study, and then you're supposed to make it palatable, usually driving home like a singular point, like you said. It seems like a lot of times people either skip the hill or they skip the mountain. They either have just too much and you can't have anything on the cutting room floor, or there was no actual study behind it. But it's interesting with just thinking about where we are in America. That it's kind of a, we share kind of a Western culture, but in America, in an election year, you guys just had elections over in Great Britain. England had some. I'm curious your thoughts on that as well. Things looked a bit dicey as they're looking dicey here, but people are looking for life answers, and a lot of times the encouragement, whether it comes in sermons or whether it comes in articles or whatever format, is often very light on application, almost to the point of like you should think spiritual thoughts and then go out and encounter a world for which you feel unprepared, which is an interesting dynamic to give people when God's word says it is sufficient for godly living. So, no, I'm grateful for your thoughts on that. How goes things in Great Britain, in Ireland? You guys had elections. How'd that go? And
we
what are
did.
your yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, so I wrote an article after it called "R.I.P. Christian Britain." So I am rather black-pilled. Is my answer. Uh, Things are not great on the UK front. So I'm in Northern Ireland, so we're part of the UK. So we have a slightly we have slightly interesting things here because we actually have uh, kind of like a devolved parliament that exists in Northern Ireland. So we sit slightly outside. So we don't vote for Labour or the Conservative Party. Generally speaking, they don't even really have representation here. Sometimes they do, they never get any votes. We vote for local parties that represent Northern Irish interests in the British Parliament. Um, and so that didn't go great either, by the way. We do actually have one good party here called the DUP, who are a properly, quite legitimately, quite Christian party, and are sort of that were started by a Christian Protestant Reformed minister a few decades ago, and I quite like them. I think they're too tied to the union. I don't really care about the union between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I think we'd be better off on our own. That's my immediate take on that. But in terms of things in the UK as a whole, yeah, I think a lot of Americans complain that it's a binary system and that limits your options. We wish we could have a binary system. We have a uni party. We have two parties that one are trying to outcompete each other in doing the exact same thing. Just one wants it more and quicker. So we had a conservative party in government for the last 14 years. They got in late 2009, so 14 and a half years roughly. And in that time, when they came in, we had no same-sex marriage. We didn't have any of this trans stuff. We had no woke stuff. These it was all pre any of that stuff. Uh, Mass immigration was significant, but much less than it is now.
Hmm.
We had less Islam. We had a lower taxation. We now have the highest tax burden at any point in British history since World War II. And they brought in all of that stuff and are proud of it. And so the and they repeatedly kept getting voted in. So our last election was in 2019. We have a 5-year cycle rather than a 4-year cycle. And Boris Johnson was elected on the promise of some conservative governance. Boris Johnson is not a particularly good man. He is a very flawed character in many ways. Has a bunch of a bunch of children with a bunch of different women. So it was always quite difficult to trust him. He'd always been a little bit of just play the game kind of guy, but his rhetoric was good, and he was keen to get Brexit done, which was a conservative movement, which he did, to be fair to him. That's the one good thing that he did. Brexit actually happened. But what happened after that was they just didn't do anything conservative at all. They just kept raising taxes. Immigration went through the roof. Inflation was enormous. So all of the same issues that you guys are having, but they were the better option of the two. That was the thing, is we didn't have what do you call it, a political opponent that was actually making the case for less of this stuff. Labour got in. So Labour got in with a significant majority. There was a campaign that the Conservatives should get 0 seats. That was the meme, was 0 seats for the Conservative Party, like destroy them as a party. That would have been a good thing. They needed to be ended. They got slightly more than expected. They got about 100. 0 seats was a meme. 100 or less would have been like the end of the party. They got about 120, so they're not quite done. But Labour got in with a significant majority. However, they got in with a significant majority in spite of the fact that I think fewer people actually voted for them, or at least roughly the same amount that voted for them in the last election when they got completely wiped out. So basically this time around, no one showed up to vote. The Conservative voters all stayed home. They punished the party, rightly so, because they haven't done anything conservative in 14 years. And they basically said, yeah, we're happy to see them go under. They didn't go out and vote for Labour. They're just saying we want a different party to appear. So the minute we have a Labour government, the Labour government have already, I mean, they're already it's not good. We're just going to get more tax. We're going to get a whole bunch of issues. They've just today, or yesterday was it, announced that they have plans to ban what they're calling conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is anybody saying that you are in fact not a woman born in a man's body. So that's what that will lead to, is so Christian ministry, prayer, all of that stuff is going to become at least technically illegal in many cases, or very easily could. It hasn't been fully passed yet, but they've said that that's what they're planning on passing. It's going to be a very broad, vaguely worded ban that is going to be a real challenge for Christians. And so we're not in a particularly good place. There's not really an option that looks likely to. So certainly we know we've got them for 5 years. And there's not really a good option that I can see on the horizon. Nigel Farage is probably the closest thing we have to a sort of Trumpian kind of figure. He is more common sense than everybody else, and he seems to not actively hate Britain, which is a good thing. So I would be favorable towards him, but I mean, they have no history of winning a lot of seats. They managed to win 5 seats out of nearly 600. So, this is not a significant party by that way. Although we have a strange system. You've got a first past the post system. So, done by all of these counties and constituencies. So yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to mount a serious electoral challenge within the next 5 years. I don't think Farage is disciplined enough or organized enough, and I don't think the party is disciplined or organized enough to do that. So I don't really know what the future of Britain looks like. It's at a point now where, I mean, I've been very quiet about this, but I've said it to you and I said it in my article, and I'm going to start making the case. I think Northern Ireland should secede and declare independence. I think that's actually our best option. There's nobody else makes that case, by the way. I don't think that is likely to happen. I've not heard a single person here. We're divided along the lines of be part of the United Kingdom, which we are, or join the United Ireland. I think a pox on both your houses, or not a pox on both your houses. Your houses are both full of pox, and we don't want to be there anymore. Would be a more accurate analogy. And we'd like to stay out because we actually have a relatively Christian and common sense ethos here, and I can see no other way the other way forward for us here in Northern Ireland, and I have no idea what the future looks like for the UK, other than a sort of mass revival very quickly. Serious trouble is what it looks like.
Okay, yeah. Well, that was massively encouraging, Jamie.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. No, I mean it's good to hear that. It's just making me, we've been reflecting. Obviously, the U.S. has had um I'm not even sure what YouTube filters will allow these days, but we had an assassination attempt on a former president, right? These are traumatic times and dark times. Um I think one of the things that stuck out to me, we've talked on our channel, and many others have talked about the kind of psychological effects of things on a people group, right? 1984 and those type of things are always brought up. But then you got the space trilogy. We were talking about this on a recent episode. The power of being made to confess things that you know not to be true, but also the kind of numbing effect that it has on the psyche, and we could say on the soul, right? It just kind of this muting effect. It's been interesting to me, and this is completely subjective, and I haven't seen anybody else talking about it, so it may just be a wrong take on my part. But you have an assassination attempt on a former president. You have all of this turmoil. There didn't seem to be much surprise in the news media or just among the
Mhm.
populace. I found that in and of itself surprising or shocking. Maybe it's you speak to people, for example, of various, not that not that all of these events are equal in any way, but you think of like momentous events during our lifetimes. 9/11 happened. Where were you? The shock, the horror. You speak to people about the Kennedy assassination. Where were you? How did the country respond? We have something like this happen, and of course, it was an unsuccessful attempt, but at the same time, it didn't seem like there was even any shock or surprise. It's just an interesting time to be guiding Christians through, in a time where we should have our senses on alert and should be sensitized to these things, and yet there is a desensitizing among our culture that it seems like we're experiencing. I don't know if Britain falls into the same boat on that regard, but it's something I think as Christians, if we're talking about, you led off this with talking about when the watchmen do not call foul or do not cry danger. If that's the state of the Christian church, and we're looking about and saying, a general apathetic shrug to events that should actually key us in. I wonder how the Christian church is to keep alert for those dangers on the horizon.
Yeah.
And one of the
Yeah.
things, by the way, if maybe this will help lead in. One of the things you guys at Clear Truth spoke about early on was identifying the danger of 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, that the dangers of today will not be the dangers of tomorrow, and how to keep alert for those things while obviously maintaining a healthy Christian ethos and attitude, but yet being alert for the thing that's down the road, I think is going to be something vital for Christians to key in on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a fundamental difference between conservative evangelical Christianity in America and in the UK that I very much seen, and I feel much more at home actually with US Christianity, and I think there is an affinity there. I think Northern Irish Christianity is much more outspoken than it is across the water. My experience and what I see, with some exceptions, and they're wonderful brothers, and I'm not disparaging any English, guys that are going for it and doing good work, but by and large there is just a total reticence to speak to anything, even among guys that are properly Bible believing and properly conservative on a lot of issues. They're so I think it comes back to like an English sort of desire for politeness. I just feel like they're just it's just so ingrained that you can't be impolite, and that has almost become like like an 11th commandment for English Christians is thou
Mm,
shalt be polite, and
yeah.
it is impolite to raise political questions. It is impolite to push back on cultural issues in any way that's remotely. I mean, to do it at all actually would be a good start. Like there really is nothing. It's amazing. I mean, if you read, there's stats been done on this, but I think something like I may be getting this ever so slightly wrong, but I'm in the right ball. Something like I believe it's 80 or 90% of clergy would identify themselves as sort of guardian readers in the Church of England, which is the largest denomination in the UK. And so 80, 90% of clergy are read the left wing paper, right? It's the sort of New York Times over here. And uh, 80, 90% of the people in the pews are Daily Telegraph readers. That's the conservative paper. So we have a broadly speaking, relatively conservative uh, people, laity, and a very left wing culturally and politically, even among Bible believing, like theological conservatives are left leaning, which to me is insane, and I don't get it. I cannot understand how you're voting for literal socialists who are uniting with Muslims, to take over the country and promote all the woke trans stuff. I'm just like, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you justify that. It's a really, really like sort of radical two kingdoms perspective of like this has nothing to do with that at
Right.
all. Um, and so yeah, I think it is a really big challenge. I think what encourages me is I think that the American church has a lot more robustness in it in that regard. I think you do find, yeah, big issues, big evil, all that stuff. We've talked about all those guys, but actually there is a legitimate movement there pushing back, and it's not the biggest movement, but there is something there. There's like if we decided to have an equivalent, if we had a conference over here with people that thought like, some of you guys do, it would be like five of us. We could do it in my bedroom. Um, it really is small. Um, whereas you can get legit thousands of people out there, to pull something together. And I, I actually think that the US elections are really important for us. Americans probably we follow American politics very closely, and that's because functionally we live in the United States empire. Um, Whether we like it or not, the Western world is dominated by what happens in the States. It holds a lot of power. There are American troops on our soil, right? That's an empire. That's the thing, and we're friendly, and they're friendly, and I like them all, right? There's not a problem. But that's a sort of imperial thing that happens there, and they hold a lot of sway. And so if America has a very liberal, if you have the Democrats in power, that has a big impact here. If America goes to the right, if America goes conservative, it does have a restraining force on even the left-wing governments here as to what sort of becomes the open window in the Western world kind of shifts with America. So
Yeah.
I'm very much praying for the U.S. elections. I genuinely do think it's important for the Western world and the Anglosphere as a whole. So yeah, it's there's a lot of issues there. I look to America and go, yeah, do you know what? I think you guys might do it. I think it might actually happen. I think that the church might actually rise up, and I think that there may actually be a political pushback. Both, and I'm not saying, not equating the two. These are different things, but nonetheless, that does encourage me, and I go right there. If that happens, that can have a serious knock-on effect. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful and prayerful for that.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And yeah, there does seem to be a shift in the wind. It's palpable on multiple levels in the US, and it's not just somebody flying the flag for a certain political candidate. There does seem to be a lot more within Christianity, a lot more I don't want to use the word revival, but a retrieval, let's say, just of some just basic hard-hitting conservative teaching. And you also see that within the culture. You just see a bit of a tide shift. And it's one of those things that when things are going on like all of the nonsense for the last 4 years, you do wonder, like, at a certain point, will people have had enough? And it seems hopeful that maybe people have, and maybe they'll turn to the right places for the right answers. So no, I appreciate that. Jamie, where can people keep up with you? Where are you at on YouTube and Twitter and your Clear Truth articles? Where can people follow you?
Yeah, so cleartruthmedia.com is the big one at the minute. We'd love people to go over there, love people to subscribe and all of that stuff as well to all of that. So we have our various Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, whatever people are on. Search for Clear Truth Media, we're on there. And then me personally, my YouTube channel and my Twitter, just under my name, GME Bambrick, and people can search for that. And I have been on vacation, so I had some preloaded stuff that is ready to go. I'm trying to get back to a more regular rhythm. It's been once a week rather than I upped it to 2 times a week, which people seem to enjoy. So I'm like, I'm going to try and do that. But last month, as I said before we jumped on, has been busy. So we're at one a week. but looking forward to getting back in the saddle and doing a bit more.
Very cool. No, you've got the cheat code. I meant to say it at the front end of the episode. I was talking to a friend before I came on here, and I said, what are you going to ask Jamie? And he said, it doesn't even matter. He said he could say pretty much anything, and his accent just makes it sound brilliant. And I would totally listen to him for an hour. And I was like, well, that's difficult because yeah, you could just say anything. It's like I have to really dissect when I'm listening to you. Is like, what's he actually saying? Because it sounds brilliant with the accent. But no, keep up with your channel, brother. Appreciate your work, and yeah, God bless all the efforts with Clear Truth.
Oh, thank you very much. Always great to be with you.
Seated here at my right hand, the Lord to my Lord did command, for of these heathen I will make a kingly footstool for your sake. The Lord